Clint Eastwood kicked out of Jimmy Kimmel's show live, shocking details of their heated showdown. Before we move forward, kindly hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to get notifications from us. It was a typical Thursday night in Hollywood, and the atmosphere at Jimmy Kimmel Live was electric with excitement. The audience, filled with eager fans, had gathered for what was expected to be an unforgettable episode featuring Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, promoting his latest film. Clint, now in his mid-90s, had been a symbol of stoic masculinity and hard-earned wisdom for decades. His reputation as a no-nonsense figure in the industry preceded him, yet everyone assumed his appearance on the late-night talk show would be business as usual. Jimmy Kimmel, the host known for his witty and sometimes sarcastic humor, was about to meet one of Hollywood's toughest veterans in a public forum. The show's writers had prepared a mix of lighthearted banter and thoughtful discussion about Clint's film career and his most recent directorial project. The set was bustling with the usual pre-show energy as the crew made final adjustments, and the audience settled into their seats, buzzing with anticipation. Clint had been a frequent guest on talk shows over the years, and there was a certain comfort level when it came to discussing his past films or his legendary role in shaping American cinema. But tonight, there was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to hang in the air, though no one could quite put their finger on why. As Clint stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening, his presence was commanding, as always. Jimmy greeted Clint with a broad smile, and the signature warm handshake he extended to all his guests. The two exchanged pleasantries, and the first few minutes of the show unfolded just like any other late-night appearance. Jimmy made a joke about Clint's iconic roles in spaghetti westerns, playfully teasing him about the man-with-no-name persona. Clint chuckled lightly, offering a dry response that only slightly broke his typical stoic demeanor. The audience laughed along, sensing a fun back and forth between two giants of their respective domains. Everything appeared to be going smoothly, and it seemed as though Clint had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a friendly chat. But beneath the surface, something wasn't quite right. As Jimmy began to delve deeper into Clint's career, offering questions about his transition from actor to director and his thoughts on modern Hollywood, Clint's mood subtly shifted. His responses, while still courteous, became increasingly clipped. The audience, ever perceptive to changes in tone, began to sense a shift in the dynamic. Jimmy, known for his sharp wit and fearless approach to banter, pressed on, asking Clint about his thoughts on younger filmmakers and the evolving nature of cinema. That's when the tension began to manifest. Do you think modern filmmakers are taking the same risks you did in the 70s and 80s? Jimmy asked, leaning forward in his chair, eager to hear Clint's thoughts. Clint's eyes narrowed slightly. He paused for a beat, his lips tight. "You're asking the wrong person. I don't concern myself with what others are doing," he replied coolly. His tone was not rude but devoid of any warmth. Jimmy, sensing an opportunity for a little playful jab, smiled and said, "Come on, Clint, you've been around the block enough times. Surely you've got some thoughts on the direction cinema's headed. Can't be all cowboy movies and tough guys, right?" The studio fell silent. Clint's jaw tightened, and a flicker of frustration flashed across his face. For a brief moment, the playful banter between the two had gone too far. Clint's temper, which had simmered just beneath the surface, began to boil over. His patience was wearing thin, and Jimmy had just crossed a line that Clint hadn't expected from someone he considered a friend of the industry. The atmosphere in the studio shifted. The audience, once excited and jovial, now sat on the edge of their seats, unsure of what was coming next. Jimmy, oblivious to the brewing storm, continued to press with more questions. But Clint's face, normally calm and collected, had become a mask of discomfort and irritation. It was clear that the legendary actor wasn't interested in continuing the conversation in the lighthearted manner Jimmy had envisioned. In the blink of an eye, the easygoing nature of the interview had evaporated. What had begun as a typical late-night interview was suddenly on the brink of an explosive fallout. Little did anyone know, the next few minutes would change the course of the entire show. As the silence lingered, an uncomfortable stillness settled over the set. Jimmy Kimmel, a master of navigating awkward moments, sensed something had shifted. He paused, unsure whether to continue with his usual charm or to back off and give Clint the space he needed. But Clint wasn't giving him that option. His stoic expression had hardened, and the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. The audience, once filled with excitement, now shifted in their seats, uncertain of what was happening before them. Jimmy, never one to shy away from a challenge, tried to lighten the mood. I get it, Clint, you're the man who taught us all to make my day, right? No room for soft stuff in your world, huh? He said with a grin, hoping to break the ice. But Clint's response was as cold as his iconic stare. There's a difference between making a point and making a joke, Jimmy, he said, his voice low but firm. His words hit like a punch, and the audience fell into a stunned silence, not knowing whether to laugh or to be concerned. Clint's usual charm and gruff humor had been replaced by something sharper, more volatile. Jimmy, unsure of how to proceed, but unwilling to back down, leaned forward slightly, his eyes twinkling with that familiar mischievous glint. Okay, no jokes, I get it. Let's talk about the film then, he said, attempting to shift the conversation to safer ground. How did you feel when you were directing your latest project? You've always had a pretty distinct vision. Do you think the industry is still open to directors who don't play by the rules? Clint's expression barely shifted, but his voice became more clipped. The industry's full of people who think they know better than the next guy, he said, his words deliberate and filled with an edge that hadn't been there before. He paused, and Jimmy hesitated to speak, sensing Clint was holding back more than he was willing to share. But Clint, seemingly tired of the back and forth, continued. There's too much talking, too much politics. People forget what matters most is the work. And that's what I've always focused on. Jimmy, now sensing that Clint wasn't in the mood for lighthearted banter, tried to steer the conversation to a more serious direction. Right, I get it, Clint. You're all about the craft, but don't you think things have changed? I mean, look at how films are made now, with all the digital stuff and streaming platforms. How does that sit with someone like you? Clint's eyes narrowed further, and his jaw clenched. What's wrong with how things used to be done? People are too busy with gadgets and gimmicks. They forget how to tell a real story. I'm not interested in how shiny the new toys are, Jimmy, he snapped, his frustration now evident. His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen decades of change, most of which he hadn't welcomed. The words landed harder than Jimmy had anticipated, and his usual playful smile faltered for a moment. He was used to challenging his guests, but Clint Eastwood wasn't like any other guest. He was a living legend, a man whose reputation was built on being tough, straightforward, and unapologetically real. Jimmy had crossed a line, yes, but it seemed Clint had reached his breaking point. What had started as a casual exchange about the changing landscape of Hollywood had turned into a deeply personal confrontation. Jimmy, trying to salvage the situation, laughed nervously. Well, I don't think I'm going to convince you to join the streaming revolution anytime soon, he said, attempting to play it off as another joke. But Clint wasn't having it. I'm not here to entertain you, Jimmy, I'm here to talk about real things. If you're not interested in that, then maybe we should wrap this up, Clint said, standing up abruptly. The motion caught everyone off guard. Jimmy, his face now a mixture of confusion and disbelief, watched as Clint began to walk toward the side of the stage, his back turned to the cameras. The audience, still unsure of how to react, exchanged nervous glances. Was Clint really walking off the show? The tension in the studio reached a boiling point. Jimmy, left momentarily stunned by Clint's sudden outburst, could only watch as the crew scrambled to respond. It was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't going to be a typical Jimmy Kimmel Live episode. As Clint neared the edge of the stage, the security team, who had been standing quietly in the wings, moved into action. The air seemed to freeze as the sound of footsteps echoed across the studio. In a split second, Jimmy's signature late-night comfort zone had been shattered. The showdown that no one had seen coming was unfolding live before millions of viewers. As Clint's foot hovered just an inch away from stepping off the stage, Jimmy sat there frozen, unsure of how to react. His usual quick wit seemed absent, replaced by a palpable sense of discomfort. The show, which had been running smoothly just moments before, had quickly spiraled into a live TV disaster. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The audience, sensing that something far beyond a normal disagreement was unfolding, grew silent. It wasn't the usual laughter or applause that filled the air, but rather an uneasy stillness. Clint's hand brushed against the back of his chair as he prepared to leave, and the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Jimmy, realizing the gravity of the moment, quickly rose to his feet. His signature smile faltered, replaced by an expression of genuine concern. "Clint, wait," Jimmy said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "Look, I didn't mean to upset you, I was just trying to have a conversation." But Clint, with his back still to the audience, didn't respond. His posture remained rigid, as though the years of tough, unrelenting roles he had played were now manifesting in this moment. The security staff, who had been standing by, made their move. One of the guards stepped forward, quietly approaching Clint from behind. The studio cameras, which had been focused on the action, quickly cut to a shot of the crew members scrambling, unsure of what to do next. Clint's face, usually one of stoic determination, was now etched with the frustration of a man who had been pushed too far. "Clint, please," Jimmy said again, his tone more urgent now. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't a comedic moment anymore. He had gone too far, and there was no turning back. He had tried to poke fun at Clint's career, but Clint wasn't in the mood for jokes. This was serious. Clint finally spoke, his voice low and cold. "I don't have time for this, Jimmy," he said, his words deliberate. "This isn't an act. You want to make light of my life's work, fine, but I don't have to sit here and take it." Without another word, Clint turned to face the security guard who had been positioned beside him. The guard stepped forward, but Clint, despite his age, moved with the same unyielding intensity that had defined his career. "I'm done here," Clint said firmly, his words final. He walked towards the side of the stage, never once glancing back at Jimmy or the crew. The audience was in stunned silence. The cameras, which had been trained on Clint's every movement, zoomed in on his face for a brief moment before cutting to an awkward shot of Jimmy, standing alone at the center of the stage, visibly shaken. The late-night host was no stranger to controversial moments, but this was something entirely different. The realness of Clint's departure, coupled with the unexpected tension of the situation, had left Jimmy dumbfounded. As Clint disappeared behind the curtains, the security team remained in place, making sure he left without incident. The moment had happened so quickly, it felt almost surreal. No one could have predicted that a simple interview would turn into a fiery confrontation. Jimmy, still standing at center stage, forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well," Jimmy said into the mic, his voice slightly quivering, but trying to maintain his composure, that's a wrap for tonight's show, folks." His words, meant to lighten the mood, fell flat, and the audience, still processing what had just transpired, barely reacted. The crew in the control room quickly began switching to the credits, and the cameras started to pull away from Jimmy, focusing on the empty stage. In the moments that followed, the energy in the studio shifted from confusion to disbelief. The producers in the control room were scrambling to figure out how to end the show on such an awkward note. Jimmy's mind raced as he replayed every second of the interview in his head. What went wrong? Had he misread Clint, or had Clint simply had enough of being questioned in the same tired way? There were no clear answers, but the tension that had built up was undeniable. Behind the scenes, the producers and staff huddled together, whispering in hushed tones, trying to assess the fallout from the public spectacle. They knew this would be all over the news in minutes. How could it not be? Clint Eastwood, the man who had stood tall in front of the world for decades, had been ejected from a late-night show after a heated argument with the host. Wasn't just a moment in pop culture, it was history unfolding in real time. As the crew slowly began to pack up, Jimmy remained seated on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. The realization was beginning to settle in. This wasn't just an awkward moment, this was a full-blown disaster, and it was all unfolding live, for the whole world to see. The next morning, the media was ablaze with coverage of the shocking Jimmy Kimmel Live incident. News outlets, gossip blogs, and social media platforms exploded with speculation about what had happened between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel. The story spread like wildfire, drawing attention from both the entertainment world and the general public. Headlines screamed, "Clint Eastwood kicked out of Jimmy Kimmel's show live," and "What really happened between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel?" Even the most casual viewers, who had tuned in for a light-hearted interview, found themselves gripped by the drama of the previous night's event. Within hours, clips of Clint walking off the stage went viral, with millions of views across various social media platforms. Fans, critics, and celebrities alike weighed in with their opinions. Some sided with Clint, praising his no-nonsense attitude, while others defended Jimmy, claiming that the host was simply doing his job and didn't deserve the harsh treatment. The public seemed to be divided. Some believed that Clint's sudden exit was a reflection of his old-school mentality, while others felt that Jimmy had crossed a line by pushing Clint too hard during the interview. In Hollywood, the incident sent ripples through the industry. For many, it was an unprecedented moment of rawness. Talk show hosts, producers and Hollywood insiders watched the fallout unfold with keen interest. While some admired Clint's refusal to engage in the usual late-night banter, others saw the episode as a warning about the dangers of mixing real-life personalities with the expectations of a scripted entertainment world. After all, Clint Eastwood had never been one to play by Hollywood's rules, and now, it seemed, that was more apparent than ever. Jimmy Kimmel's team, meanwhile, was scrambling to manage the fallout. The morning after the show aired, Jimmy's PR team was flooded with calls from media outlets seeking comment on the incident. The host himself, typically known for his quick comebacks and self-deprecating humor, was quiet. He knew he'd made a misstep, but the reality of the situation hadn't fully hit him until that moment. He had respected Clint, admired him even, but he had misjudged the tone of the conversation. What was supposed to be a fun interview had escalated into something much darker. Later that day, Jimmy posted a statement on social media, addressing the situation directly. "I want to apologize to Clint Eastwood for last night's interview," the post read. "I deeply respect Clint and his incredible career, and it was never my intention to upset him. Sometimes, the line between humor and respect can get blurred, and I crossed it. I hope to have him back on the show one day, and I'm grateful for all he has done for film and for the entertainment industry." The apology, while sincere, did little to quell the public's curiosity. The incident had already become bigger than just an awkward moment on a late-night talk show. It had become a media spectacle. Fans flooded Twitter with their own takes on the altercation. Some took to calling it the Clash of the Titans, while others humorously dubbed it the Eastwood Exile. The memes were endless, and even some of Clint's closest colleagues weighed in. Actor Matthew McConaughey, a friend of Clint's, tweeted, "Some people forget the value of silence. Clint's a legend for a reason, respect." While McConaughey's comment was a show of support for Clint, it only fueled the growing controversy, leading to even more speculation about Clint's relationship with the late-night scene. Behind the scenes, Clint's representatives had received numerous requests for interviews and statements, but Clint himself remained largely silent. Those who knew him best weren't surprised by his decision to avoid the spotlight. Clint was a man of few words, and his actions often spoke louder than anything he could say. His reluctance to engage with the media only deepened the mystery surrounding the altercation. Was he angry, hurt, or was he simply indifferent to the whole ordeal? Despite the media frenzy, Clint didn't seem to care. The legendary director and actor had built a career based on stoic resilience and integrity, and this was just another moment to him, a fleeting distraction in an otherwise long and successful life. He wasn't interested in making headlines or explaining himself. His time was far too valuable for such trivialities. In the days that followed, Jimmy Kimmel resumed his regular hosting duties, but there was an underlying tension that couldn't be ignored. His interactions with guests felt a bit more cautious, as if he were walking on eggshells. He still had his trademark humor, but the events with Clint had cast a shadow over his usual carefree approach. The confrontation had changed him, and there was no going back. The incident would forever be a part of his late-night legacy. For Clint, however, life went on as usual. He was back to directing his films and living his life in the same unpretentious way he always had. He didn't need to explain himself to anyone, least of all to the world of late-night television. The incident with Jimmy Kimmel, though shocking, was just another chapter in Clint Eastwood's long and storied career, one that only added to his mystique as a Hollywood legend. Weeks passed since the explosive fallout between Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel, but the reverberations of that unforgettable moment continued to echo throughout the entertainment industry. While some stories fade from the headlines, after a few days, this one had legs. There was no escaping it. From late-night talk shows to Hollywood roundtables, everyone was still talking about the fiery exchange. In the wake of Clint's unexpected departure from Jimmy Kimmel Live, the media couldn't help but revisit the moment, dissecting it from every possible angle. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his ability to make light of any situation, had initially hoped the storm would pass. He threw himself into his usual late-night routine, yet there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. Gone were the carefree quips and playful jabs that made his show so popular. Instead, there was a cautious approach to his guest interviews, especially when the topics veered toward anything remotely controversial. Jimmy, who had built a reputation for making celebrities feel at ease with his charm, now found himself second-guessing his every move. The producers at Jimmy Kimmel Live were also feeling the weight of the incident. There was a palpable tension behind the scenes. The interview with Clint had been planned for months, and it had been meant to be the highlight of the season. The fallout had taken everyone by surprise, and now the team was left picking up the pieces. There were discussions about whether the show needed a new direction, whether it should shy away from controversial guests, or whether they should embrace the controversy and lean into the moment. In truth, no one quite knew what the right move was. But the story didn't end with the show's immediate aftermath. The public was still captivated by the mystery of Clint Eastwood's sudden departure. While Clint had remained silent in the media, the whispers surrounding him only grew louder. Was he truly angry with Jimmy, or was this a calculated move on Clint's part to distance himself from the celebrity culture he had never quite embraced? Speculation ran rampant, but Clint's refusal to clarify his stance only added to the allure of the situation. As the weeks wore on, Clint's representatives, though careful in their communication, confirmed that he had no ill will toward Jimmy Kimmel. Clint has nothing but respect for Jimmy and his career, his spokesperson told a reporter from The Hollywood Reporter. It was a momentary disagreement, and Clint prefers to keep his personal feelings private. He's back to working on his films, as usual. Despite this official statement, fans and media outlets couldn't shake the idea that something deeper had occurred. It was rare for Clint to let his emotions show in public, let alone on a national television stage. His stoic nature, paired with his decision to walk off the set without explanation, had left fans fascinated. For those who admired Clint, it was a moment of raw honesty that broke through the polished veneer of Hollywood. To others, it was a reminder of his uncompromising, old-school attitude, one that didn't mesh with the modern world of late-night TV. In the aftermath, late-night television as a whole found itself in a peculiar position. Shows like The Tonight Show and Late Night with Stephen Colbert began to see a noticeable shift in the way they treated their celebrity guests. Interviews became more cautious, less edgy. The dynamic of asking tough questions or pressing for jokes seemed to shift, with hosts opting for more measured, respectful conversation. In some ways, the Clint Eastwood incident had shaken the foundations of the late-night talk show, reminding everyone that not all stars played by the same rules. Yeah. Months later, a much-needed reconciliation between Jimmy Kimmel and Clint Eastwood took place, but it was quiet and personal. Neither party made a public spectacle of it, but sources confirmed that Jimmy had reached out to Clint to express his genuine remorse.
Clint,
True to his character, accepted the apology, but made it clear that he wasn't one for drawn-out media discussion.
Good.
The two men shared a mutual respect, and though they didn't address the incident publicly, the understanding between them was clear. For Jimmy, the incident became a defining moment of his career. It was a hard lesson in navigating the delicate balance between humor and respect, especially when dealing with someone as iconic as Clint Eastwood. But it was also a turning point. Jimmy learned that some guests, like Clint, weren't interested in playing the same game that most others did on late-night television. The experience pushed him to grow, and while the aftermath had been uncomfortable, it gave him the perspective he needed to evolve as a host. As for Clint, the incident barely registered as a blip in his storied career. To him, it was just another moment, a brief flash of tension that had played out on the stage of a talk show. The world had moved on, as it always did, and Clint was already focusing on his next film project. He was a man who had weathered storms far bigger than a late-night television dispute, and his legend remained unchanged. In the end, both Clint Eastwood and Jimmy Kimmel had emerged from the fiery exchange in their own way, wiser, perhaps, but still very much the men they had always been. The moment had been a rare glimpse into the reality of Hollywood, an industry that thrived on performance but could never quite control the unpredictable nature of its stars. Use playo, was a morbini one shotter, 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 was a morbini one shotter. And while the world may have forgotten the details of that heated night, the memory of Clint Eastwood's departure from Jimmy Kimmel Live would remain a fascinating chapter in the history of late-night television, a story of two men, one legendary, one up-and-coming, who were both bound by their own principles and unwilling to compromise on what mattered most. So walk Cotter.